Hey guys, Richard here with a Government Sales Momentum podcast. Today we're going to talk about how important it is to understand how the government buys what you sell. Because depending on what you sell will, target different agencies, and those agencies will have preferred ways of making purchases, whether it's a product or a service. Keep in mind, when we're talking about the public sector, what's great about this is all the information is public, with some rare exceptions. There are classified contracts and there can be a lag in reporting. But for the most part, we can look at all of the government spending. So whether you're selling software or construction services, or, you name it, really, it could be anything. It could be a virtual reality device, or a product that you've just invented that solves potentially a need. We can go and we can look at related areas and see what the government is spending. We can see who's doing the spending, and we can see how they're making the purchases. And that's what this is centered around. So first, let's get started. And I wanted to start with the area that most companies, especially small businesses, or maybe some companies that are new to this, focus on. And that's the RFP, or the request for proposal. So that's when you go into sam.gov and you see a solicitation and it says request for proposal or request for quote. And they're looking for, they could be looking for anything. But when we see an RFP, I want everyone to understand that this is probably the most complex and lengthy way the government will make a purchase. It's typically reserved for higher value contracts. It's typically, there's typically a certain amount of complexity involved with what they're purchasing, but that's not always the case. Some contracting officers only, really understand the RFP process, which is FAR Part 15, if I have my FAR reference correct. But, that's not the only way to make purchases. And it's incumbent upon you as the business owner, not only to understand how the government likes to make purchases, but also understand the different ways they can buy from you. Because you can educate the contracting team on the other side. You can make them aware of a way they can buy from you that they might not understand. So RFP, request for proposal, typically, you have to put the solicitation together. There's a lot of work on the government side, just putting that solicitation together. Sometimes RFIs and sources sought come out before that. They put the solicitation out, and there's maybe a month or two where companies are putting their proposals together, government collects them, then there's boards and down selects, and eventually one company or maybe multiple companies are awarded parts of that solicitation. But that whole process could take 12 months, 18 months, depending on the value of the contract and the complexity. But there are several other ways that the government makes purchases. So we can look at the information, the purchasing trends over time, and see, for instance, if you're targeting a office at Hanscom Air Force Base that makes purchases with, for the type of products or services you sell, we could see how they're making those, right? So one of those things that you can discover is, hey, I'm seeing, X number of $1 million being spent through that office, maybe a couple different offices at Hanscom or maybe Wright Pat Air Force Base or another agency, and they're using IDIQs. And I love IDIQs because, this is indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contract. A lot of times what an IDIQ is there might be a competition up front amongst a bunch of companies, and you down select to maybe 20 that get awarded this IDIQ contract. And, it has a certain length of time, maybe 5 years, has a certain, period of performance, it has a certain ceiling, maybe it's 500 million. And then the government can place delivery orders on the company that is on that contract, or companies. The government can also award an IDIQ, just to your company. This covers a lot of different things, GWAX, MAX, a lot of different things. I lump GSA in there as well. Others might disagree with that, but we're basically talking about companies that are on these IDIQs or big contracts that have already been competed, and the government can either have additional competitions on there, or just place a delivery order on you, depending on how that's written. But the point of this is, especially if it's the government doesn't know how much they want to buy, or maybe exactly what. Once you're on that contract, they can say, "Hey, we're going to put you on contract. we know you have services or products we want to buy. We just don't know how much, the quantity or the price yet, or the exact details, but we'll tell you that later. Let's get you on the IDIQ now. So that's the IDIQ. So that's another big way of selling to the government. And, once you know which agency you're targeting, and you can see they're maybe selling with an IDIQ that perhaps you don't have, right? Because also keep in mind, there are IDIQs that multiple agencies can use, right? So, you might be selling to just the Army or just NASA, but, for instance, NASA soup, multiple agencies can use the NASA soup IDIQ to buy services. So understanding that is going to be fundamental to how you approach an organization. So if that Air Force office, for instance, that we saw, if they were using NASA soup, that IDIQ, to make purchases, even though you don't have an IDIQ with them, your approach to that office may be as a subcontractor with companies that are already on that contract vehicle. But now you can start to see how essential it is to understand how they make purchases, because you want to make it easy for that office to put you on contract. That was one of the hardest things for me is, even if I found a company that was really good that I wanted to put on contract, I might not be able to do it if they didn't have a vehicle, or if they weren't subbing to a prime that I could already get to, because the government, even though a lot of people are frustrated, I think the government just, wants to take as long as possible to do stuff. I could tell you that, coming from that arena, there was a program manager. I did not want to wait 6 months or a year to put someone on contract. If I needed someone, I want to put them on contract now. And there are a lot of ways I could do, or in 30 days or 60 days. What's the fastest way I could do this legally and responsibly? An IDIQ is a great way to do that. And if your company's not on the IDIQ, so using that NASA soup example, now you can find companies that are already on there, and you can partner with them, finding companies that make sense as a teaming partner, or that you sub to. And that's a great way to approach and get your foot in the door with that agency or that office. It's a great path forward, but you need to understand that and do your homework first, and align yourself with their purchasing strategies. So now let's talk about a couple different ways that the government can make quicker purchases. Now, in fact, the majority of purchases from the government are through simplified acquisitions procedures and GPC card purchases. Now let's talk about that. That doesn't mean that most of the money is spent on those or via those vehicles, just the number of transactions. And, the reason is because think about a GPC card is a government purchase card. It's a government credit card. Every unit has one. So what I often tell people is, less than 1% of people in the government will ever be able to put you on contract, because you need a warranted contracting officer to do that. In fact, most people in the government have no clue how to really put you on a large contract. They might have, some surface level understanding of SAM.gov and solicitations, and maybe others have worked in requirements and have a better understanding. But unless you're actually in the acquisitions field and that's your profession within the government, they probably have no clue how to get to you. The one difference is the GPC card, because every unit I've ever been in, every office has had a government purchase card, or they've at least had somebody in charge of a government purchase card that can make purchases. Now, those are for smaller dollar purchases. So if you sell smaller products, a GPC card can be used for purchases up to $10,000. A GPC card can be used for purchases actually more than that if the right paperwork's in place. But typically, you're thinking smaller dollar items, office supplies. You might be putting something together for, advertising or marketing for a unit, or doing some, special graphic project. I've seen GPC cards used to purchase everything from, customized mugs for the guys in the unit, to books, to, you name it. But those are the type of things GPC cards typically are going to be used for. So again, depending on what you sell, you may be able to have a purchase through a GPC card. Simplified acquisitions procedures, I would say, is the next level on top of the GPC card. So those are for purchases up to $250,000. I believe blanket purchase agreements and some other things fall under SAP, simplified acquisitions. But this is still a faster way for the government to make purchases that aren't going to take as long as the traditional acquisitions process, if that makes sense. So These are just a few ways that the government can make purchases that you want to understand as a small business. And there are a lot of resources for you to use to try to figure this out. You can use, some of the more expensive systems out there, that you can purchase, the IDIQs, the monthly subscription services. GovTribe is one that's actually not that expensive, where you can get a little bit of insight on. There are free ones like usaspending.gov. There are other ones that you can use. I mean, of course, there's sam.gov, which I think that website is not very intuitive or easy to use. So I usually recommend, if you're going to do that type of research, to purchase something that you and your team can use that can give you much more, I guess you could say, a quicker forecast or a quicker way to research past sales and upcoming opportunities. But any of those you can use to help you get an idea of what those purchasing trends are. And, the more time you spend on it with a tool, the better you're going to be at understanding, how do they make purchases? What's the percentage? What are the exact offices that use those? You can get down to details like which offices or which services or agencies rely on different set-asides like SDVOSB or 8A. And that can help you in who you're targeting for sales. But really the point of this is understanding, once you know who you're selling to, aligning your company with the way that they make purchases. And then you can recommend some of those. Like, for instance, if you pick up an IDIQ, you might be dealing with an office that, or maybe you're on GSA, you might be dealing with an office that isn't used to using those. You might be dealing with an office that wants to buy what you're selling, and they're used to putting RFPs out for everything, or RFQs. Well, now you could tell them, hey, I'm on this IDIQ, or I'm using GSA, and these are a couple different ways that you can get to me. Of course, relationships are really what's going to allow you to do some of that. And it's extremely important to have that relationship in place. I've talked about that on several other podcasts, but want to give you a good overview of some of the ways they can make purchases from you. Hopefully you have found this relevant and useful. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to go to our website, richardchoward.com. You can fill out a consultation form. We'd be happy to talk to you if you have any questions. And thanks again for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.